Hi, Happy New Year. It's Ed Gallo, the Wrestling for MMA podcast on the Fight Site Podcast Network. I'm back for another week with no fights. No fights on my radar, at least. But we do have something to talk about. We can briefly recap the Rizin card. There isn't too much to talk about there. Yeah, worth touching on. And then I'm going to preview the Wrestling for MMA Awards for 2020. I did that in 2019 as an article, and I thought it was pretty fun. And I have thoughts about the winners for this year, and we'll talk about it. So, hope everyone's doing well. Hope everyone was safe over the new year. I'm just trying to keep up, honestly. I hope everyone enjoyed last week with my guests, Richard and Jack. Yeah, but we previewed the Rising card on that podcast. And on that podcast, we talked about how Greco Roman world champion Shinobu Ota was making his MMA debut. So, no MMA experience prior, first fight ever, pro debut against Hideo Tokoro at 135. And Tokoro's had, 60 plus fights, mostly submissions. Just a really experienced grappler against someone whose only perceived skill is wrestling. So all they can do is take you down pretty much, or not get taken down. You can't strike with them, and if you take them down, you're gonna have to grapple with them. So we didn't have our hopes up for that fight. We figured there's only so much you can learn in a short period of time, and it's your first fight. So Ota actually looked pretty good. He didn't win. Spoilers there if you didn't know. He didn't win, but he looked pretty solid. He couldn't strike very well, which is fine. I didn't expect him to be able to yet. Disproportionately, it's funny. I posted a clip of Ota and Louis Smolka, the Hawaiian MMA fighter, very good flyweight and bantamweight. He talked about how it's going to be tougher to transition quickly for him because of his build, because he has short arms and a long torso. And I thought he was exaggerating a little bit because it's harder to tell in Greco when they're all hunched up. He's like, yeah, he's gonna have to learn footwork and how to strike, at the same time, instead of like just learn how to hit not being enough for starters. And I'm like, well, yeah, that sounds true for everybody. But then when I saw him fight, I was like, oh wow, his arms really are short. He has some T-Rex arms, so he was having some trouble there. Takoro made him look like a flyweight. I don't know if Takoro's big or if he's just really a flyweight. It would make sense because in wrestling, you cut weight more often, or you have to weigh in on multiple days, stuff like that. So you have to be closer to the weight class you're weighing in at. So he was wrestling at 60 kilograms and 63 kilograms. So that's, about 130, 135. Um, but he probably weighs around that, probably around 140, early 40s. So I think he's actually a flyweight. Um, that would make sense to me. In MMA, you only cut weight like what 4 or 5 times a year maximum. So yeah, way more time to do it. You can drop a whole ton of a lot more, and then there's a 1 day period afterward for you to recover. So I would expect to see him at flyweight, but yeah, he did pretty well. Countering Tokoro's striking entries with body locks, like I thought he would. And the cool thing was that he did not look in any danger of getting guillotined. He was keeping his head in the center, which is really awesome. So if you ever hit like a spear double, same thing. You put your face in their chest or do like across the hips. Have your head across on the outside and push that way. And yeah, he had that same approach with his body locks. Just crunching him over, picking him up, putting him down, slamming him hard, and they looked very physical. They looked like he could do damage with his body locks, which is cool. And he was still very white belty with his grappling. Takora was getting to a lot of attempts, and he was stronging his way out of them, picking him up and slamming him when he tried to armbar him. He slammed his way out of like 4 or 5 arm bars at least. It was impressive that he kept doing it. And then as the fight wore on, it was the same dynamic playing out over and over again. I think he got dropped like just being completely off balance on a stance, got hit with something and got dropped on like it's like a chin thing. He didn't look super uncomfortable being hit. He just didn't really know what he was doing. So that didn't help. But yeah, later on he got wore down, and slamming his way out of arm bars didn't work as much, and he got armbarred. But yeah, I mean, about as well as I could have hoped for. Honestly, I hope he fights again in maybe like 6 months to a year time, to give him some time to continue to develop. Give him someone easier than Takoro. He would have beat someone easier than Takoro this time. So if you'll give him a little bit more time to develop, give him someone else, then I think it'll go well. So that was Shinobu Ota. That was the big fight I was looking forward to in terms of wrestling. And then Miyu Yamamoto, who's a 3-time world champion in freestyle, she fought Ayaka Hamasaki, who's a good little wrestling grappler herself. I think they're 115 pounders. And Miyu took her down right away, and Hamasaki countered with the Kimura grip, and she held onto the Kimura grip, and Miyu didn't seem to know how to pass it to get the grip back. She kept holding positions and just didn't quite seem to know what the transitions were. And that gave Hamasaki time to work the Kimura and sweep her with it. And then while she was trying to work the Kimura from topside, she, how you step around the head to finish a Kimura from side control. She stepped around the head and put her other leg under the head and did basically a leg scissors choke and was crushing her face with the leg scissors while she had the Kimura grip. And I think she tapped to that because it was on her face. So not great, not great for Miyu. But that's always kind of been her thing, not totally knowing what she's doing on the ground. But yeah, that was Rizin. Pretty interesting stuff. Nothing too much more to say with regard to wrestling. Okay, let's do some awards. I only do 2 awards for the Wrestling for MMA Awards. Maybe people can suggest some categories in the future. Maybe I'll do 3. Maybe I'll play with it now. I'm in the process of writing the article. Basically, it's an article, and I'm grabbing all the clips for the article first. And I have basically all the clips now, so it's just a matter of writing it, which is the worst part. So it'll probably come out Friday or something like that. I assume this will be released on Wednesday. I'm recording this on Tuesday, just full disclosure. Yeah, but the categories I typically do are Takedown of the Year and Wrestling Performance of the Year, which is obviously only 2 categories, but I feel like that encompasses pretty much everything. Some of the other ideas I've heard is Breakout Wrestler of the Year, where somebody who's bursting onto the scene that seems to be a good wrestler in MMA. And my buddy Grandma Flarkin said Wrestliest Fight of the Year. I think that's sure. We could do that one. So let's start with Takedown of the Year. It's a tough category to label just because do you go with whatever looked the coolest or what was the most difficult to execute or what was the most meaningful Takedown of the Year? So let's go with the ones that were kind of cool, but mostly because of the significance of what it meant in the moment. So runner up for that side of it, runner up for just significance, I would say Alexander Volkanovski and his inside trips on Max Holloway. He had been trying to wrestle Max in both of their fights for a long time and looking really, really tough. Edgar couldn't do it either. And he made an adjustment and used his outside shots to get into upper body over under positions and had a really nice inside trip finish where he was hop stepping in, hooking the leg, and basically hitting a hard pivot and turning him over the base leg and causing Max to fall over. I think he hit it twice. So it's just a really nice wrestling adjustment, beautiful technique against someone who's very difficult to wrestle. And although he didn't do a ton with the positions after he got the takedowns, they were probably determining factors in swinging maybe a round or 2 in his favor. So it helped him get the decision, even though it shouldn't have. Not saying I don't really know how I scored that fight. I'm not saying who should have won, but if the takedowns were a factor in scoring, they shouldn't have been, but they likely were. So Alexander Volkanovski deserves some props for that. And then the most significant takedown of the year, I would say, was Khabib Nurmagomedov hitting that double off the low kick of Justin Gaethje, the one that finished the fight, essentially. This was a really beautiful read by Khabib. So prior to the fight, I didn't think Khabib was going to be able to take him down in any sort of open space situation, just because his go-to attacks from open space have always been those low singles, head inside singles, stuff like that. And early in the fight, you saw him shoot a head inside single off a leg kick, and Gaethje whizzes and throws him off. if you looked at the other fight in Gaethje's career where he had been someone tried to wrestle him a lot, it was the Luis Firmino fight. There's a lot of information there that ended up being pretty valuable. But you could tell which kind of situations he was really comfortable in, where he was hard to wrestle and where he was easier to wrestle. And basically, if you come to him, if you back him up, his defensive reactions leave him more exposed for wrestling. Um, and specifically, Firmino shot a double. He shot a bunch of doubles straight on, and Gaethje really good getting his hips back, really good at just creating that gap. So obviously, if you can get them to have that reaction, you can slip your head out around the outside, around the lat, and turn the corner and get to their back and get a clean finish that way. Which is how a lot of people are taught doubles in the first place. But Khabib never shoots that style. I've never seen him shoot a double, hit his knee, and turn the corner like that. Usually his doubles are against the cage, and if he's shooting open space, it's his single. So something he either hadn't done in a very, very long time or hadn't done ever in a fight could be busted out. I assume because he watched the tape and studied and saw, oh, hey, here's something that'll work on him, and trained that specific finish. So that was really blew me away that he hit that. We were watching the same thing. But yeah, he was having trouble taking him down other than the one shot against the cage at the end of the first round. And yeah, just game plan for that super well, really brilliant strategy. Habib is, I always gave him credit for being smart, but he's even smarter than I gave him credit for. Honestly, him and his camp, him and his team. Um, so yeah, really, really awesome takedown, that double that he hit on Justin Gaethje to take the back. And then Gaethje goes to his own back and gives up mount, and that's where the triangle came from. So, um, yeah, won the most important fight of the year probably. So that's my takedown of the year with regard to significance. And then with regard to coolness, two takedowns come to mind. Both of them are throws. I think throws are just cooler. It is the coolest kind of takedown. Just in chronological order, Mark O. Madsen, Greco million-time world and Olympic medalist, all silvers and bronze, unfortunately. But yeah, Madsen's a fighting at lightweight. I wrote about him twice so far. I wrote about his wrestling accomplishments, and I wrote about just evaluating him before his UFC debut, how he's doing, how he looks. And he hit a really beautiful back arch off of a side body lock for what would have been 4 points in Greco. It was just a really gorgeous technique, and I appreciate that. And it looked cool, for sure. If I had done this in previous years, like Michael Chandler's big back arch on Benson Henderson, that probably would have won an award as well. Basically, if you hit a big back arch, I'm probably going to give you an award because it doesn't happen that often. It's a little bit of waste of energy, I would say, just because usually it's returning them to a position you might be able to get them to with a much less energy demanding technique. But yeah, it was cool. It was very cool. Oh, you know what? I need to add to this. I looked at the UFC and Bellator for this a little bit. Rizin, but Rizin didn't really have anything. Legacy Fighting Alliance. Mo Miller. I need to give Mo Miller an award. Maybe like breakout wrestling prospect of the year, Mo Miller. But Mo Miller also hit a big mat return and actually knocked his opponent out in his most recent fight. If you don't know Mo Miller, I wrote about him twice, I believe. I interviewed him, and that was awesome. I did a little breakdown on what his amateur career and his wrestling career, and then I broke down his second to most recent fight where he beat a pretty solid prospect and looked really good. He trains at a strong style in Ohio. It's Stipe Miocic's gym, and he's just a really awesome guy and a really cool wrestler and turning into a really good fighter already. And I would expect him to fight for an LFA title soon, and then UFC probably after that. So you'll know him soon enough. He's bantamweight. But shout out Mo Miller. Maybe that's breakout wrestler of the year. And then other cool takedown of the year candidate, which I kind of wanted to bring up the wrestler for the breakout wrestler of the year category because I think this is probably the answer. Ilia Topuria, the Georgian fighting out of Spain, another Greco guy, and a lot of Greco represented this year, but another Greco guy, and he hit a gorgeous, another back arching throw, this time belly to belly from double under as a double under body lock. Yusuf Zalal had him against the cage, I believe in some sort of loose double overscript. And yeah, Topuria pummeled for a double under, got a tight body lock, turned him around with it, and just sent him flying. And it was just like perfect landing, perfect amplitude, everything was perfect. The flight path. So yeah, you'll see clips of those when the article comes out. But yeah, those are two of the coolest takedowns I saw this year. There are a bunch of other cool things that happened, but they'll be covered in the rest of the awards. So this is my takedown in the years, and my breakout wrestlers of the year, I would say, are for non-UFC. I would say probably, well, yeah, I guess I'll go into another person here, but it would be Mo Miller and Ilya Topuria are definitely nominees. I would also like to nominate Yaroslav Amosov, who fights in Bellator at welterweight. He is amazing. First of all, he's undefeated. Very very well rounded, very physical, high motor, more like a volume striker kind of guy. I believe he is a Hooft fighter, Henry Hooft. So Usman, Chandler, Burns, that crew. Uh, but he had two really amazing performances this year. I'm going to transition into the wrestling performances of the year after this because he really deserved to be in that conversation as well. He fought Ed Ruth, who was a three-time NCAA champion, and he fought Logan Storley, who's a four-time All-American. Uh, and both of those fights were super wrestling heavy, and he was taking them down. And I wrote about the Ed Ruth fight before the Storley fight. But the Storley fight's pretty amazing if you haven't seen that. Super high pace, really grueling. They both should have been exhausted. Storley's gas tank really held up well. But if you like single legs in MMA and like single leg defense and single leg offense and just figuring out how to make singles work in MMA, that's a really good fight to study. Um, Obviously, you won't just automatically become four-time All-American caliber, but you can just notice some of the little things there. But I haven't sat down to study that one since it happened, but there's two beautiful performances, two wins for Amosov against really, really high-level credentialed wrestlers, big prospects in the division, and he out-wrestled both of them more or less. So hats off. That's definitely a breakout wrestler. I don't know if he's a prospect yet. I mean, anymore, just because he has so many fights. He has over 20 fights, and he's undefeated. And Bellator definitely has a good read on where he's at as a contender. Um, but yeah, Yaroslav Amosov, I definitely want to give a shout out to. Um, Wrestling performances of the year while I'm on Bellator. Let's just get the Bellator out of the way. Just a overall year for Aaron Pico. I think he fought three times. He figured it out. He figured his game out. He's functional at this point. Um, and it just took basic stuff. He understands the overhand double leg dynamic, basically that the level changing motion of your overhand looks like the level changing motion of your double leg. So you can feint one, hit the other, hit one, set up the other. They work together really well. I wrote about that, about Joey Davis, who I also would like to nominate. Also looking functional and like a great wrestler. Just two guys who were very, very credentialed. Aaron Pico was a two-time California state champion. Then he dropped out of high school basically because he just wanted to pursue wrestling full time. Didn't go to college. Just started doing freestyle and beat a world champion before he was done, and then made it to the Olympic team trials finals against Frank Molinaro and lost two matches to one. Um, and didn't make the Olympic team in 2016, but he's a cadet world champion, I believe. Just very, very credentialed wrestler and had been training MMA basically the whole time during that. So people were very excited for him. And he took on too tough competition too fast and got knocked out a bunch. But now, even though he's at Greg Jackson's gym, he's figuring it out. Just looked very functional. Some submission wins, and his most recent fight against John DeJesus. That's somebody I'm kind of familiar with. He trains with a friend of mine, and the guy is really known for his counter knees. He really, you try to hit him in the body, try to take him down, he's going to throw a knee up the middle. And Pico realized that. He feinted the level change for the double to draw out the knee, and the next time he did it, he hit the overhand. So basically, he has the guy leaning back with his hands down, smash him with the overhand. So that's wrestling basically. Wrestling set up that finish. So props to Aaron Pico for getting it together. I hope he's successful moving forward. Joey Davis always kind of knew how his wrestling and striking worked together, but fought I think at least twice this year. Looked good doing it. Just happy for him. He's doing well. I've written about him a couple times before as well. I wrote a book about him. don't ask me about it. It's not available for purchase right now. But yeah, shout out to Joey Davis as well, 4-time undefeated NCAA champion at the Division II level. And then one more from Bellator that really stood out to me was Magomed Magomedov crossing over from ACB, now ACA. Guy has a win over Peter Yan, and just has always looked like a well-rounded physical wrestler, but he looked like a different kind of guy in his Bellator debut, like way more physical, stronger, more focused with his game plan. And he was hitting these huge lifts off of singles and just looking super strong against Matthews Matos, who also a former Peter Yan opponent, and just put a really nasty ride on him. So I think one of the lifts was like he did the full arc midair, and he landed really funky on his neck and his arm, but didn't seem injured. But it was tough. So cool performance there from Magomedov. Yeah, that's it for Bellator. And let's go wrestling performances of the year for the UFC. There were a bunch, and I made clips for almost all of them already. It's taken a while. First shout out goes to Merab Dvalishvili. What can you say? He broke the record for takedowns in a year. I don't totally agree with the way the UFC counts takedowns. I think most of the time they count mat returns as takedowns, which the reason I disagree with that is because you already took them down and you still have your same grip on them, and they're like standing up and you're just breaking them back down. More of a breakdown in a ride than a new takedown to me. And the reason that makes a difference to me is, the takedown setup should involve striking or a transition or something like that. You're just retaining mostly the same position, but they're standing now, and then you just put them back down. That's a return. That's not really a takedown. It's not just me being a stickler about college rules or whatever. I think there's actually a significant contextual difference, but I digress. They counted them for Khabib too, so it's not like it's a different different metric. But yeah, he broke the record for takedowns in a year. He had fights against Casey Kenny, Gustavo Lopez, and John Dodson. 2 of those are meaningful wins, I would say. Casey Kenny's looking really good lately, and John Dodson's like almost impossible to take down and hold down. And Merab got him down, I think, a couple of times and held some like rear standing positions and need his leg, but still he wrestled John Dodson, which is cool. But yeah, the Gustavo Lopez one is the fight that I wrote about just because he took him down like 12 times. So I had a lot to write about. And yeah, he had some cool finishes on his takedowns there, some cool doubles off the overhand. I think he like did a cartwheel pass finish off of one of his doubles. That could be a takedown of the year nomination, honestly. The shout out Merab, definitely one of the most wrestling centric fighters in the UFC right now. I don't love that like there isn't really that much else going on in his game other than just takedowns, but I like takedowns, so I appreciate him. We talked about Marco Madsen. Wrestling performance of the year, strong contender. I don't really know who to give it to with all of these, but it might be Aljamain Sterling versus Corey Sandhagen, number 1 contender fight. And Sandhagen comes out pressuring super hard right away. Sandhagen kicks off the back foot. Sterling catches the kicks, transitions into a double, basically the same situation, but at a higher, physically higher level, not figuratively higher level, at a higher level than Khabib and Justin Gaethje. But off the kick, hits the double. This time he's working on the cage, and basically he gets to a high underhook on the cage and works him over this way to get Sandhagen turning, and he gets him, just keeps punching it, gets him to turn away a little bit, then transitions to the back, and then ends up jumping up and putting his hooks in and attacking a choke right away. And on his next adjustment with the choke, he finishes it. So quick finish, 1 takedown against in a number 1 contender fight against someone really tough. I wrote about Sterling beforehand and like his style of takedowns and the way he wrestles in MMA. And I mentioned that he looks much more effective when he pressures and gets to the fence. And he did. So really awesome performance from him. Really impressive stuff. Curtis Blades. Here's the heavyweight on the list. Curtis Blades versus Alexander Volkov. It was a main event slot. Not that Volkov's a super tough wrestler, but Blades just for 5 rounds was really consistent and effective with his double leg entries, both in the open and on the cage. And I wrote about that as well. Just basically things that I noticed this year is this list. But yeah, Curtis Blades looked really good. He's probably the most functional wrestler at heavyweight now. And yeah, just a really solid performance, wrestling heavy performance from him. Uh, Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal at UFC 251. That was a really great wrestling performance against a guy who was very tough to wrestle. I wrote about Masvidal's defense last year, how good it is, but yeah, Usman didn't look super clean in the striking, but the few things he did well worked to set up his takedowns. Defensively, he was parrying kicks across, and he was able to parry kicks across to turn Masvidal sideways and expose his hips and give up really easy double entries. And then against the cage, Usman was kind of like putting out his jab and kind of feeling out exchanges and feinting, getting Masvidal to open up with counters and then shooting on his hips. Um, and the work on the cage obviously is always good from Usman. I did write about that one, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but yeah, that was a great performance. Could be the award winner as well. I haven't decided. I'm probably not going to decide now at all. So you'll have to wait for the article to see who wins. Um, yeah, that was great. I already talked about Volkanovski and Holloway. Gotta mention Hamza Chimaev. Definitely a breakout fighter of the year. Maybe he'll get the award, but he didn't. Hmm. 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 With breakout wrestler of the year, do I need for them to have fought good competition? If so, then it's Amasov by a mile. But if it's not, then like who looked most impressive wrestling? Well, Chimaev had 2 fights where he took the guys down a couple times. Topuria took Yusuf Zalal down 100 times, but then he just knocked out his next opponent. So it might be Chimaev, but I'm probably going to give it to Amasov just to avoid that conundrum. But Chimaev definitely deserves some praise. Versus John Phillips and Reese McKee, Western Europeans who definitely can't wrestle at all. So grain of salt there, but he's definitely a good wrestler. He does that Ali Bagov, Rustam Karimov entry, the high kick into the level change. Super athletic maneuver to pull off. So obviously he's very impressive just for that. Be a really athletic entries on the feet, and great top game. And he's definitely broken out as one of the most popular fighters of the year, I would say. He also had a really nice body lock situation. I think it was against Reese McKee. He shot off the right hand. He stepped through the right hand and transitioned into the single. I don't really like that entry because I don't like anything that's going to push the person back into open space, and then you have to extend yourself to get to the single. But if you're really good at finishing singles, it can work. Or if the person has bad footwork and they don't move backward, then you're golden. If they just swing back, that's a good entry. But yeah, he did that, and then he climbed up to a body lock situation, just like holding him tight in the body lock, like dude was just hovering off the ground until he finished it. Very strong guy. I think next week Ryan and I are going to do a podcast just about Chimaev, about if he's good or not. Maybe next week, but before his fight for sure. But yeah, shout out Chimaev for those wrestling performances. Uh, One of my favorite fights of the year was Movsar Evloev versus Mike Grundy. I talked about Evloev before whatever card they were on. Him and Topuria were supposed to be on the card together, but Evloev's fight got canceled, so I didn't get to talk about him afterward. But I talked about them both in pretty solid depth beforehand. Evloev, another Greco guy, really cool defensive wrestling performance against Mike Grundy, who is a world team rep from England in the past, Great Britain, whatever they call themselves these days. But yeah, Mike Grundy was hitting really nice reactive doubles, and doubles on the lead, and Evloev was showing really cool escapes, all sorts of escapes. Like he was getting feet on hips and pushing off. He was getting 2-on-1 and putting the arm on the other side and standing up with that. He hit a fat man roll from the turtle position. He had a super sick counter from bottom front headlock. Grundy was putting a lot of weight on him, and he built up a little bit and basically sat back hard and used his head as a lever to basically throw Grundy feet to back over his head. So that was amazing. And yeah, he just looked really good overall as a defensive and counter and anti wrestler. All the words. It's funny, he's not offensively wrestling in his fights, but he could. I've watched his training footage. He's another Tiger Muay Thai guy. But yeah, really impressive defensive wrestling performance and offensive wrestling performance from Grundy to keep getting him down. Grundy's super impressive physically. I mean, he pushed the pace, a really exhausting fight for 3 rounds. I recommend watching that one, especially because Steve Floyd's work on the feet in between the takedowns was really pretty cool. Here's a takedown of the year candidate. I forgot this one. Kevin Holland versus Charlie Ontiveros. The guy was pretty annoying on the feet. He was like throwing out axe kicks and just looked very he was fast. I think Holland didn't like it, didn't like the speed. So he basically just bum rushed him. Actually, he didn't just bum rush him. He was smarter than that. He was using skip up kicks. He was doing skip up feints with his kicks to back up onto Veros. And then after he skipped up, he was punching and collapsing the distance and getting into the cage. So impressive entries there. But he was getting to the body lock in the cage and just big lifts and knee blocks to make sure he could put him over his base with big lifts and returns off the body lock. And he actually knocked him out with the second body lock. So props to Kevin Holland for knocking a guy out with a takedown. I think he's the only one on the list to do that. Might have been the only fighter in the UFC to knock someone out with a takedown this year. So gotta get some props there. I don't have a lot to say about this, but Alistair Overeem versus Augusto Sakai. I think that was the main event. He took him down a bunch. He did a lot of redirection off the cage. Props to Overeem for being a wrestler this late in his career. That's cool. Topuria as well. I talked about it. Really good fight. Guram Kutateladze versus I don't know how to say it. Gamrot. I forgot his name last time I talked about him. But Gamrot was the KSW champion at lightweight, coming over, very highly regarded, both as a striker and as a wrestler. I think his base is wrestling. But he was trying to wrestle Guram, who looked pretty solid in the feet. And they were just getting into some really fun scrambles and just, Gamrot was chain wrestling and Guram was just matching him and looked really, competent defensively. And it was just a cool fight. And the clip will reflect that. But yeah, that was a great one. And Guram won, so keep your eye out for Guram Kutateladze in the future. He's really interesting and physical, big, giant legs. He looks like Georgian Benson Henderson. All right, I talked about Khabib and Justin Gaethje. Or an under the radar wrestling performance this year. Maybe not an under the radar performance overall, but just from a wrestling perspective, was RDA Rafael dos Anjos versus Paul Felder. He wrestled the crap out of him. He pressured super hard from open stance like he does, and was just getting Felder exchanging, just opening up exchanges. And then when Felder threw back, level changing, getting doubles against the cage. It's looking really clean with his doubles, kind of pulling him off to the side to reshoot and get a deeper entry on the hips, or coming back up to the body lock and doing knee block finishes off the body lock. It was really good cage wrestling performance from RDA, like you're used to. It looked like the Pettis fight. Looked like a lower octane version of the Pettis fight. And he didn't beat up Felder as badly as he beat up Pettis, but it was a similar type of performance. So cool vintage RDA pressure cage wrestling performance. I liked that very much. This one hurts a little bit. Brandon Moreno versus Davison Figueiredo. He took him down with like 50 body locks. He kept body locking him. I talked about it on another podcast that it was mostly because Figueiredo doesn't know how to defend body locks. Does not move his feet at all. Just kind of starts stand straight up and tries to dig for overhooks. I'm like, dude, your base is nothing. And surprise, surprise, Moreno kept taking him down. So award for Moreno for continuously taking him down with the same technique, but also negative award for Figueiredo for not knowing what to do about that. On that same card, Charles Oliveira versus Tony Ferguson. Just really nice, smart, reactive entries from Oliveira, catching kicks, intercepting entries, and also I believe he pressured Ferguson to the fence and took him down the fence as well. So it's a nice, smart performance and excellent top control from Oliveira. And if you want a really in-depth breakdown of that fight, on the last MMA podcast, the New Year's edition, on the fight site, Ryan just like went off about that fight, just broke it down super great detail. So if you want to know like what is Oliveira doing differently, what is he doing well now that's separating him, what allowed him to control Ferguson, there's a lot of good stuff there. One more from that card that I wrote about, Gavin Tucker versus Billy Quarantillo. More of a clinching performance, but yeah, just really, really awesome display of clinch entries and like transitions from the clinch positions to takedowns. I actually forget. I dumped out all of my knowledge into the article for this. So there's an article. Please read it. I worked hard on it, but just really excellent clinch and upper body based takedown performance from Gavin Tucker against Billy Quarantillo. I think a lot of knee block body locks in that one as well. And he hit the like the outside stepping, shifting double leg entry that like TJ Dillashaw does. Yeah, that was basically everything that I remember. Um, did Amanda Hebos hit that Harai Goshi this year? Was that this year? It might have been. I wrote about that. I don't ignore women's MMA. I talk about it when I can. I don't remember which fight it was. It might have been the Mackenzie Dern fight. That was 2019. She fought 2 more times this year. I definitely watched those fights, but I don't remember what happened. There might have been takedown of the year and wrestling performance of the year type of fights in 2020 for women's, but I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head. So let me know if you remember any, but I don't. Defensively, Jessica Rose Clark had a good defensive performance against Sarah Alpar, who's a wrestler, and she defended pretty much everything and won that fight in brutal fashion. So shout out Jess for her wrestling. But yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it for the awards. So yeah, I'll try to get that article out soon. Let me know if you can think of more categories. I think next year we'll probably have more to talk about just because there'll be a more regular event schedule and there'll be more wrestlers competing, more people competing. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. Next week, if it's not the Chimaev thing, I'll figure out something else to talk about. Maybe I'll take some listener questions again. I've been trying to avoid that because that's what made me take the hiatus in the first place, was because the listener questions, some of them were hard. And I had to like actually do work and research them. And I don't want to do that. So we'll see. We'll see. Okay. See you guys around. If you want to talk to me on Twitter at Edward Gallo MMA. If you're not on Twitter, I guess you can talk in the YouTube comments, but I warn you, the YouTube comments are going to be filled with like bot accounts. So if that bothers you, then don't show up. But yeah, okay. See everybody next week.